this one will also be interesting. We're going to talk about our most memorable purchases and simultaneously our worst purchases for the money. Not necessarily most expensive, just regrets both in buying as well as in selling them. Hi, I'm Adrian from Audio Excellence Canada. That's Philip and Jerry behind the camera. So we're going to talk about our regrets, both good and bad, of stuff that we've bought over the years. Might help you, may not. And if you don't have the same impressions, certainly comment below. And of course, please like and subscribe to the video. It helps us get this video out. And as usual, all the funds we get from YouTube, we match and we donate. The last one, we got $1,500, 15 and change.
Wow.
$1,500. So altogether, we donated over $3,000 to the Salvation Army. So that was nice. Thank you to all of you.
It's a good thing that we're busy enough to actually make that donation.
Yeah,
it's not always easy to match it.
Yeah, thank God. Well, next time, I interesting enough, I was just thinking, besides Salvation Army, is there another charity we should look at? So the other day I was driving and I was listening to the radio for a weather report, and an ad came up for a charity called Covenant House.
Oh, yeah, that's supposed to be good, too.
And I don't know anything about it, but I made a quick note to myself I should look into it. So
isn't that where the kids stay? For
something like that, yeah. So I'm going to look into it. I mean, well-known charities like Make-A-Wish and so on, they're already very well supported, right? And so I thought we don't need to be a part of that. I'd like to support other charities that are just as worthy, but maybe not quite as well-known. And so, maybe single mothers, abused, runaway children, kids, that kind of thing. So if any of you have suggestions for charities, please drop me a line or write in the comments, and we'll look into it. Thank you. So anyway, Philip, what's your regrets for? Well, let's start with your most memorable purchases that you thought that you might like them and turned out that you way like them.
Well, that's easy. That's the last purchase I made, which is Watt Puppy 6s.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, I have the story, as all you might know, or if you don't know it, I hated Wilson. Until I started
Jerry will link the video in the description.
Until I started working at the store and I heard the Sabrinas, and I was just dumbfounded. I was flabbergasted. I didn't realize that they had changed so much. And now, of course, I heard Wilson's at American Sound way back in the day, and I remember hearing them at the old store in the Heritage House way back. And then fast forward, because I bought everything else. I never bought Wilson's. I couldn't afford them then. I might have been able to, but in any case, that pair showed up, and then 5 minutes into it, I had to buy them. I called you. That's part of the stories. I called you. So that's my really, that's my most memorable moment, because that speaker surprised me so much, and I liked it so much.
Just as a follow-up, by the way, because of his crazy love now, we have 2, 3, maybe 4 pairs of Wilsons coming in the next few days, and Philip's already pre-sold a whole bunch of them already.
Maybe.
Yeah. And this goes to show you when you're that impressed by something or with something, the passion just comes through.
Chi, who bought the Maxes that were here, so that was also very surprising, because really I had not thought that any of the old series with the focal tweeter would be something I liked. And the Maxes were actually very, very, very good. Yeah. And Chi he hasn't resold them. He just has them in his room, and he just bought more stuff.
10 by 12 or 13. He's not a big
He
room.
plays it really loud. He has big Mac amps. He has dedicated
1.25 kW.
Yeah, that's right.
1.25 kW.
He came in the other day and said, Philip,
Jerry, make sure you put a picture.
He said, Philip, is that too much for the room? I said, well, for you, no. Which I'm not even exaggerating. So that is my most memorable purchase, because it is such a good speaker. I mean, I don't know what it is about the Watt Puppy 6, because I really dislike the Watt Puppy 5 so much. and the 6 was just so different. And
Well,
so,
if we ever get another pair of puppy 5s, let's listen and compare.
well, there's a 3.1 coming,
yeah.
and which might already be pre-sold,
Yeah.
guys.
Well, when we get it in, we'll compare it. Yeah.
So that's supposed to be closer to the 5 because it has the more detailed focal tweeter. So if you bought the Watt Puppy, Watt 2s, that's supposed to be a smoother, richer kind of sound. And the 3 is actually more detailed and more alive and more dimensional. Yeah, so that's my most memorable.
Okay. What about others?
Other
Others that-
memorable.
Yeah, others so that people who might be on the lookout for
Well-
some really good suggestions.
Any of the vintage speakers I've purchased over the course of the last 25 years, the big ones, I've always been super happy with, including I had Voice of the Theater, the Magnificents, which are like what A7s, but a home version. That was an amazing speaker. Albeit that the person I bought it from, a Chinese guy, he actually braced the inside, so it might have had some advantages. But it's basically essentially stock, and that was a really fabulous speaker for my situation. Obviously, the CLS. So a lot of it is like speaker related. The electronics, I did have a luminescence, an MFA luminescence, and that for a time was my pride and joy until I realized it was kind of dark sounding and I got rid of it. So you do change. So, it's hard to highlight something because it's been so long, and I purchased so many things and went through so much. A lot of it I really, really, really liked.
What about regrets?
Okay.
That's a longer one.
It's not really a regret in the true sense. There's a story here. I was just thinking about it on the way in today, and any purchase, especially if you're not purchasing new from a reputable dealer, is always going to be fraught with complications. So back in the day when I had a bit of money that I could spend on audio, I ended up buying a pair of, and when audio was still sort of like reasonably priced, I ended up buying a pair of JBL C50 Olympuses with the S8R package, which is big 375 compression driver. This one had the 075 ring tweeter, and obviously 15-inch LE 15A with the passive radiator. So I bought it from this guy from California. The pictures are kind of blurry, and I didn't really notice it too much, all the problems that I eventually did see. And they arrived. I paid like huge dollars to freight it here from California. I opened it up, and then I looked at it closely, and the boxes were like crap.
Oh.
So part of buying these things is because it's furniture grade, speakers. And the whole top was, both tops were water damage. And then for some reason, I don't know why I didn't see this in the pictures, but there's a lip on top of that speaker. The very top is bigger than actual what's underneath it. And it's all walnut. It's beautifully finished, and someone had cut it.
Oh.
So they made it completely, rectangular. There was nothing protruding beyond what the speaker was, and it's part of the charm of the speaker. The grill itself is this kind of hand-built lattice fretwork, and there was holes punched in it. So it was damaged, and I call the guy up and I say, well, you said this thing was like in excellent condition, not mint, but excellent condition. And he says, well, for the age they are. That's what he told me. I go, you gotta, no one would think this, anybody who in their proper mind wouldn't think this. And so I did get a little bit of a refund. That was like a $3,000 purchase, ended up being a $2,500 purchase. Yeah, drivers were actually in pretty good shape. So I got everything redone. And then it forced me to go find another pair of Olympuses, which I did. I had to drive to Cincinnati to get them. And Cincinnati at that time, 20 years ago, was a real, not a nice place. I can't believe what the state of American cities are like. Hopefully they're a lot better now. But in that time, I drove everywhere in the American Northeast to look for stuff. Boston, Cincinnati, Detroit, and they were all not nice places. Buffalo, they were not nice places. So I actually ended up buying a pair of Olympuses C50s S7Rs, but they have it's all the same cutouts. It was in perfect shape, except the drivers were no good. Paid $2,000 for that, and I had to go down in the minivan. When I came back home. So I now had 2 pairs of speakers. I made one good pair of speakers out of them. It ended up costing me $10,000.
My gosh.
Right. I did sell the other pair. Eventually, I did fix it. I got everything done. And so I made back a little bit of money, but it still cost me $10,000 for what was supposed to be a excellent condition $3,000 pair of JBLs. So you got to be really, really careful when you look at this stuff. Even if it looks perfect, even if they say it's 100%, you don't know until you fire it up, and then it might not actually meet your expectations.
Wow, that's a crazy story.
That's a crazy story. It took me so long to get it all up and running. And then I could never really play them because I ended up moving to a condo. So they sat in storage for a few years. Yeah, so that's the story of my JBL Odyssey.
Wow. Okay, well, for me, best memories, like I said in the earlier video, the first time I bought the CLSs, that for years, for me, still magical. Some of the best sounds I've ever heard. And back when they were still, relatively speaking, reasonably affordable.
Yep.
It was a state-of-the-art speaker, relatively speaking. Incredible transparency. And you could buy them in Canada back then for about $3,200.
I bought a used pair for $1,500.
Yeah.
$1,500.
The first turntable I ever bought, well, actually my girlfriend then, now my wife, she bought me a Rega 3 for my birthday. And this is just to show you how dumb men are, at least I am. As soon as I could, I traded the Rega for a VPI HW19. Now, I did ask her if it was okay, but still, now looking back, I'm thinking, God, guys among you, don't do that. Dynaco ST70. I remember the first time I saw a tube amp that I could actually afford to buy, $300-400, and then I would modify the rectification and then really enjoyed it, and friends would like it, and I would sell it. In fact, my older brother Daniel loved it so much he bought one from me. The first Krell KSA 50, remember that?
I never owned one, but
Class
yeah,
A.
that's a pretty awesome
Very
amplifier.
nice. Used that to drive my Apogee calipers.
Oh,
that was nice. That was very nice. Yeah, and then along that, the Aragon 4004. For those among you, you can probably still find these and steal them. Aragon 4004 was designed by Dan D'Agostino, formerly of Krell, and it puts out 200 watts into 8 ohms, 400 into 4. Really well made, very substantial.
What about the bigger one?
Well, 4004 at the time was the top of the line, and then they came out with the 8008 and then the Palladium monoblocks.
So has an 8008.
Who?
Harvey.
Oh, is that right?
So you should see it on Thursday.
Yeah, I'll take pictures. Oh, in my list, Infinity RS1Bs. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So again, Jerry should find pictures and post it.
Awesome
So
speaker.
the story behind that was, again, back when the Absolute Sound and Stereophile used to have monthly topics, and each was essentially trying to outdo the other, maybe not consciously, but they were trying to. And in Absolute Sound's case, the editor, Harry Pearson, and publisher, had the Infinity IRSs, the top of the line, 7 feet tall, 4 chassis. The rest of the reviewers didn't have either the budget or space, and so for them, their choice was the RS1B, which was basically a smaller version, and in Canada, they retailed for $15,000. And I remember reading the reviews, and everybody said this was the best thing and so on, and I swore to myself one day I would try and hear it and buy a pair if I could. Well, way back then, back in the 80s, there was a newsletter slash publication that you subscribe, and every month you'd get a copy. And it was all the ads that people wanted to sell their stuff through. And I can't remember what that little newsletter was called. And I got it, and in it, somebody had advertised, Stereo Exchange had advertised that they had a pair for $1,500 US. So I talked to my friend. I said, there's no way this is real. So we called, and back then, long-distance calls were very expensive. Called down to Stereo Exchange. They said, yes, we have a pair, and yes, it's actually $1,500. So I said to my friend Bernie, we got to go get it. I don't care how. So I scraped $1,500 US. We drove down in a rented minivan all the way, and showed up on a Saturday morning. They were open. We bought the speakers, and then we said we'd come back to get them. And then we took a tour, went to see went to see Sound by Singer, went to see a bunch of other stores, and then came back on the way, picked up the speakers, wrapped them up really nicely, got to the border right around about 9 o'clock or so at night. And the border agents wouldn't believe that these speakers were $1,500. We even had the receipt from Stereo Exchange saying that. So they took
how would they know it was anything more?
I don't know. Because the speakers are big and obviously quite nice looking. So they took Bernie and I to independent interrogation rooms. Bernie went to one room. I went to another room. And the legends about how they can stick their finger up here. You know what? They didn't do it to me. Bernie never. Never elaborated, but as far as I'm concerned, they made me take everything out of my pockets and so on, and then eventually let us go. But $1,500, got back to Toronto, so excited, listened to them, and for my setup at the time, they were a bit of a letdown because they were not as transparent as the CLSs. They had a lot more bass, a lot more punch, better in so many other ways, but that transparency, that clarity, that three-dimensional...
It had the small ribbon, right?
Yes.
The emit.
That's right. The emims and the emits never quite did it for me. And eventually I sold the speakers, made money. Sold it for about 2,500 Canadian. Imagine, they were 15,000 and we sold them for 25. So that was a story about that. Quad ESL 63, still to this day, I love the speakers. But my very first pair, again, bought through that little used newsletter.
Did they flap on you?
So they arrived across the border. I had to go pick them up and got them home, plugged them in, and they started arcing. So tick, 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 tick. I called the guy up. The guy goes, oh, well, they were working fine. I had May Audio back then, who were the distributors, check it out, and they said, well, the panels are gone. You need to replace the panels. And it was going to be $1,500 to replace. I freaked out. I bought the speakers for $1,500. I had to spend another $15. I called the guy up, and he says, well, I'll give you $300. That's all he was willing to give me. So that was a big, a bad memory of that. Just trying to think. As far as turntables, I've had quite a few, but some of the best memories were my first VPI HW19 with the Eminent Technology ET2 linear tracking tone arm with the air compressor. And the tone arm, when it worked, was great, but it was a little bit fussy. So you're constantly tweaking to make sure that it's tracking correctly and it's not leaning towards one side or the other side. So anyway, if you have one, you'll know what I'm talking about. But set up properly with the Koetsu black, Koetsu red. Oh, it was beautiful. I had a great time with that. The worst, as I mentioned in the other video, Acoustat Spectra 1100s. Never liked them. Jadis JA200s. So I was lucky enough to buy a pair from a gentleman who had just passed away. Bought from his estate, all excited because, again, had read so much in Absolute Sound, got them in, plugged them in, and literally within seconds, poof, blew up. Called the tech, came over, he says, well, the tubes are gone, obviously. I said, okay. He says, but this is a catastrophic blow up. There's something more to it. So took him back, checked it out. Sure enough, a bunch of other issues, and put in new tubes. And within a couple, 3 weeks, blew again. Dug deeper. And if I remember correctly, it was essentially that the original sets of Jadis. The transformers were designed for Europe, not necessarily designed for North America, and so the conversion wasn't quite as good. And it could also be that back then, again, we're talking about 80s and 90s, tubes weren't all that great. The tubes that we could buy were, at least the regularly available ones, were not great. They were either from Russia or from China.
Yeah.
And they weren't
The Chinese tubes were just...
Yeah, they weren't all that great. So eventually he sold them. Remember the musical Fidelity A1?
I had one of those. I loved it. I used it for about 4 years.
Yeah. So I had two of them. Both of them would blow up over time because they were so hot. And the heat sinks were just not adequate. But they sounded so good, right? And so eventually a few years ago, somebody traded it in, and sure enough, it was gone. I gave it to Claudio, the tech at the time, and he basically went through it with a fine-tooth comb, changed everything. And to this day, it's still in my office. I've never plugged it in. Still in my office.
You should. It's a really, really good
I know,
sounding
but I
amp.
just don't want to plug it in and
It's
have it
so
overheat.
sweet.
And beautiful amp.
Oh my
So-
God! You know, when we had that amp at the store, we used to demo it in lots of different rooms. Like people would want to hear it with this speaker or that speaker, and we literally keep oven mitts so that we could carry the amp from one room to the other. Think about it. It's 20 watts.
Yeah.
It dissipates at least 80 watts of heat.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was a heat sink.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the top, which were where the heat sinks were just inadequate, just not enough. One of the worst purchases I ever made was the Bose 901 Series 4. So again, in the earlier video, we talked about Absolute
How
Sound,
was that?
Stereo Review and High Fidelity. These were two magazines that were the most commonly available on bookstores.
You had the equalizer.
Yes. So, again, Julian Hirsch, God rest his soul, said these were among the finest speakers, and so if you didn't know any better, you'd buy them. So I went to Queen Street, Paul.
Paul
Gillick,
Gillick.
Angie's
Great National.
ex-husband, Great National Sound. And they had a pair, and I listened. I didn't know what I was listening to. It didn't sound that good, but I figured, nah, it's
Were they
just
on the
me.
stands?
Right? Yes. It must be me. So I bought them anyway, brought them home, hooked them up, and they were terrible. They were disappointing. No highs, no real bass, and I was playing with EQ. I had the EQ turned all the way up and still no highs and no bass. They were terrible. And that's when I discovered Ring Audio on Queen Street, and they were playing me the little LS35As, and I was thinking, how can this small little box that I don't know anything about sound so much better than my highly vaunted Bose 901s? Anyway, so terrible memory. And the Carver, amazing. Same thing. The
that's a
plain R
ribbon.
speakers, yep. Again, Jerry will post pictures. They look like basically the Apogees. And Julian Hirsch, again, in Stereo Review, said these were amazing speakers, no pun intended, and bought a pair from Linear Sound up in Richmond Hill, where Angie eventually took over the store, and took them home, and they were terrible. They had horrible sound. Didn't like them at all, and sold them off. But anyway, those are some of my bad experiences. There's a lot more, but these are some bad ones.
So I have one additional story I want to tell. It's not really a bad story, but it is, something that people should think about when they read reviews and buy things based on reviews. So I'm a longtime admirer of Herb Reichard. I really respect him, and there's a whole story behind that because he was one of the members of the New York Triode Mafia. This whole bit with low-powered tube amps and high-efficiency horn speakers. So I read him in lots of different publications, and then he started working for Stereophile a few years ago. He came out with a review for the Pioneer PLX 1000, and he was just gushing about it. He really, really, really liked it. So I thought, I got to have this turntable. And eventually I did get one. Now, before buying one, I actually was able to listen to a PLX 1000, albeit back at the other store I used to work at, which is Audio Oasis. And I quite liked it. But it wasn't an elaborate setup. And so I ended up buying one. I set it up in the store, and I listened to it, and I thought, well, that's sort of ordinary. It's $1,000 Canadian turntable, basically designed for DJs. And I thought, okay, it's got to be because I don't have really good stuff on it. and I put better and better things on it. Isolation devices, better mat, fairly expensive cartridge. It didn't really get that much better. It was still good, but not great. I was expecting great. So I'm thinking, like, what is Herb talking about? What is he smoking when he wrote this review? And obviously, my expectations were so high they cannot be met. And I'm probably doing the turntable a disservice. It is still a very good table. It just wasn't as good as what I was thinking it was going to be. And that is often an issue when it comes to, well, if you buy something used or based on some sort of review and you don't get to hear it, and then, when you have to live with it, it's a different matter. So just, beware. Just be a little bit, conscious of that kind of effect.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because as time goes on, there are fewer stores carrying a variety of things that you can check out and visit. We get emails from many of you asking for help because you're not able to visit a local store. And not just because of COVID, just because they don't exist anymore. And it's sad. So Philip and I were very fortunate growing up that we were able to visit all these different stores and had access to all these different products that we could check out. So just a little tangent to say, if you can, support your local dealer. Even if they don't carry a product, if they're willing to work with you, maybe you can ask them to bring it in just for you so you can support them, because you do want to be able to physically touch, hear, listen to, and so on. So just a little public service announcement. Anyway, we're being told we got to cut off. So again, Adrian at Audio Excellence Canada, Philip and Jerry, leave your comments about some of your most memorable purchases.
Yes,
good
please
and bad.
share with us.
Yes, love to see them. And we'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.